Without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to our host today, William Sankey. William is the co-founder and CEO of Northspyre. His vision for Northspyre was born from his experience working as a developer, leading high-profile multi-million-dollar developments at prominent New York City firms, Madison Realty Capital, Macklowe Properties, and JLL. So, William, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Cordelia, for the introduction. Super excited to be here today with you guys. Thank everybody that has taking the time to join. I'm very excited to be having a conversation with Robert Entin. Robert is the Chief Information Officer of Vornado Realty Trust. And before he was at Vornado, Robert founded Integrated Business Systems, which is, they really provided a turnkey technology solutions to the real estate industry for many, many years. And since 2013, part of Integrated Business System has been joined into Vornado. Robert is a thought leader in the industry. He is probably one of the most forward-thinking, brilliant people in the industry. He's, in 2022, 2023, he was named Commercial Observer Power Prop Tech 30 list, and he sits on the Realcomm Advisory Council. He also is has a hand on the academic side. He's an adjunct professor at Columbia University, where he teaches a master's course on information technology and the real estate enterprise. So Robert covers a lot of bases. He's at a firm that has, especially in New York, is one of the most prominent firms in New York and across the country. And super excited to talk with him today about the digital imperative and transformation that's happening across our industry and across individual firms, real estate firms, real estate development firms in our industry. So welcome all of you guys. Looking forward to jumping into some questions, and thanks, Robert, for joining me.
You're welcome, William. Well, you're too kind with the introduction. I'm just a guy, right? So, yeah. And been doing this for a long time in the property management space. Kind of real estate automation has been in my blood for, obviously, as you know, many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Glad to join you.
And I say definitely not just a guy. He's a special guy, and I think a lot of people know that. So maybe to jump in, and Robert, I'd love to start picking your brain a little bit, and maybe I'll just start out like a little bit high level, given we've seen like the prop tech, property tech, construction tech, all of this really mature over the past like decade or so. And teams have really shifted into a bit more agile style working, a lot more integration of technology. This is something obviously from your time at Integrated Business. So Integrated Business Systems, you've been doing this for decades, right? And it's really started to mature. I guess, why do you think this sort of digital transformation is really such a pressing imperative? And I guess maybe to dig into that, like, what do you think some just like the big opportunities are for real estate developers here in 2025?
Well, that's a lot to swallow. That's a big question. So when I look at it as a couple of things. One, the tech stack that runs the accounting and corporate part of the real estate enterprise has been very mature and has been out there for years and years. What we have seen, as you're saying, in the last like decade, and it accelerates every year, are very well. So we focused on the corporate side of the world for many, many years. I think the advent of the smartphone and the advent of apps really changed a lot of things. One, it changed the end user's understanding of what software can do and how it can help leverage efficiencies in doing different tasks, number one. And number two, the connectivity and the ability to make these, the unaddressed area of our space has always been the building itself. The networks in the buildings weren't mature. Now the networks in the buildings are very mature, mostly very converged. And it used to be that what you had in the building was a BMS system and a fire and safety system, an elevator system. They were all separate on separate networks. As the buildings, for both sustainability purposes as well as tenant amenity and service purposes, need to provide a different experience for the occupants, and with the advent of the networks being mature, apps being very easy to build, I think that's been the for me, that's been the catalyst why there's so many point solutions and very specific solutions that have been created and are being created. Excuse me, that might either address sustainability and carbon footprints in the way the building operates as a smart building, or how, I don't want to say user friendly, but how tenant or occupant friendly it is with respect to taking advantage of whether it's simple things like access controls or access to amenities, parking, food, conference bookings. More and more buildings this is the footprint. So I think those are the catalysts that kind of brought about opportunities. And there was a vacuum in the space. The vacuum in the space was there again, because if you go back 20 years ago, the decade was spent at automating the corporate books, tenant ledgers, and the basic ERP stuff. The last 10 years has really been focusing on more the property operations and the plant.
I know that's really interesting, Robert. And I guess, specifically for Vornado, and I know you led a lot of this charge, you guys have been industry leaders in a lot of ways in terms of adopting technology at every level of how you operate as a business. You mentioned some of the tenant experience, some of the sustainability, energy initiatives, and then obviously there's a lot of things that probably go unnoticed to the external audience, like things like real estate development management platforms and things like that, right? That you guys are thinking about that maybe externally is not as obvious to everyone. I guess maybe let's get a bit of a lay of the land before we dive in a little bit more into some of the technological and digital transformation. Can you just share a little bit about Vornado, what types of projects Vornado works on, scale of these projects, how the real estate development team at Vornado is structured, and the broader team that works with them? What does the tech stack generally look like?
Sure. So as you know, we're a Class A owner developer of properties, principally in New York City. Our buildings are really super Class A buildings. We invest a ton of money to keep them at that level. As such, in the Class A space, we have really, there's like two swim lanes. We spend a ton of capital in the buildings every year on TIs and fit ups and basic core and shell type improvements. Those probably near 1,000 projects a year that are implemented or are run out of the operations group in New York. So there we're really pretty much completely automated in terms of the budgeting, the bidding, the contract management, and then the tracking of job costs. And that's of course essential for the running of the day-to-day business, particularly when we're in such a capital intensive market. And then you've got the flip side, which is building buildings. So building buildings are multi-billion dollar, like our Penn District redevelopment was a massive amount of redevelopment. We have other buildings that we're designing and or in the process of building. Those are run by a development group. So the development group at Vornado sits outside of the normal operations group. So the operations group that runs the buildings manage a ton of CapEx every year. And of course, the development group, it's the group that that's responsible for the building, large structures, large skyscrapers. In terms of the tech stack, as I said, much of what we do on the normal day in, day out TI CapEx has been automated for years. The development group, remember, because they're single instances of buildings, the numbers are very, very large. While there was some automation there, not as much. Well, let me go a different way. The driving force here has been that all of the CapEx and TI that we manage internally really stays internally. While we have relationships with, contractors who do the work and such, it's not the same as a massive development job where you have architects and engineers, you have partners, lenders, you have all kinds of stakeholders involved in those developments, and the monthly requisition process of marching every month to fund the project and approve bills and look at contracts and purchase orders. That's a very different scenario than your typical in-house managed TI and CapEx. So for us, we as you know, we implemented Northspyre a couple of years ago. And for us, that journey was we needed to find a platform that was suitable, not just for internal management, but that we could have our external stakeholders, partners, architects, engineers, all be a part of. And that kind of sets that silo separate from the normal kind of ERP based, let's track job costs. And so that's kind of, the difference between the two.
Yeah, and it's pretty tremendous seeing like, the scale and scope of what you guys do. You mentioned the thousands of small projects and the major projects, and I sort of think about just the time I spent in New York. I don't know if you know this, Robert, but I started my career. And one of the first projects I worked on was when they were doing a transformation of Madison Square Garden, which is actually pretty much surrounded. I think Vornado owns quite a bit of real estate around there, a lot of buildings. And even in probably it's been over a decade since we wrapped up that project. I've seen a lot of like the projects and intervention you guys have done from two Penn Plaza and a lot of other things going on there. So it's the scale you guys are operating at is pretty fascinating, and how you guys are being able to accomplish that sort of with the way your team is organized and the technology that you have, I think is really efficient, and sort of like leading the industry in a lot of ways. I guess maybe for a lot of teams that maybe, most development teams don't have the same scale as Vornado. And I guess I say they probably don't have someone like you that's you. I don't know, you spent what, Robert, like no, let's say many decades thinking about real estate technology. Most people don't have someone like you on the staff, right? So a lot of times maybe they've brought on and procured like an accounting system or something like that, but they really haven't thought very deeply, or they don't really know how to even approach like this sort of broader digital transformation. And I guess, I had a chance to interface with you a bit as you guys were going through the process of what you ended up procuring Northspyre. I don't think you guys knew where you end up when you started that process, but I guess maybe can you share a little bit about like just like the process you went through and like how teams might think about like procuring technology. And I guess in this case, this example that I use where you guys ended up working with us, where you're looking for maybe a development management platform, you ended up selecting Northspyre. Maybe you can share a little bit about like, what are some of the considerations that were important in bringing on a real estate development platform? Why do you think it was important to bring on a purpose-built tool for the real estate development part of your portfolio, and any other things that you thought about as you were setting up that process to make a decision?
But it's a lot to unpack there. So first I would say, look, the technology that we have in place, your product, other products in place that help us run and pay for these projects are really a small part of the picture. The real credit goes to our development team. They know how to build massively beautiful buildings. Having said that, so our search, as I said, was spurred by the notion that we needed a platform that would be kind of a good extranet, one that we could participate in as well as many of the stakeholders around can participate in, because shared information in a large development project is critical. We looked at, well, in the space, and this is not a space that was incredibly well developed. There's one incumbent, Procore, very good product, right? Know them very well. And Procore is great for construction managers. Maybe the first thing I would do is back up and say, I look at this space as you have owner developers, you have construction managers, and then you have contractors. And the problem is in this supply chain, how do you end up with a software stack that really satisfies all constituents? Procore being the leader in this space for years and has a tremendous package for construction managers, and many of the contractors use it. And of course, we've used it because many of our construction managers are on it. But it really is, in my view, it's most suitable for the construction manager, or maybe said differently, the needs of the owner developer are different. And so when we went to look, we looked at a number of packages, and we were looking for it. I would say a little bit more lightweight than a big package like Procore, because the construction manager is going to be really responsible for much of the ongoing administration of the project. Our job is to monitor and track and be able to understand the requisitions and make sure all the contracts are in place. And so we were looking for a platform that, number one, provided good document management, good inbound processing of various invoices, contracts, and such, and was easily shareable amongst the various stakeholders. And so we looked at a number of them, and as you know, I think we picked Northspyre because we thought it really was a very nice user interface, very easy to operate, very easy to drill into. to really find all the details of the job. And I guess one of the other, areas to talk about, because you mentioned, ERP, yes, no, maybe. Some of the Yardies and MRIs of the world, which dominate the ERP space, have construction management software built into them, as does IBS with Job Course. And the question then becomes, the two questions for me. One is it really suitable to run large scale jobs? For some, yes. For others, no. And so I think the purpose built software. Let me go there for a second. Best of breed versus single stack. That's been a constant discussion for years in this space, right? And the answer is that neither one is 100% right. And when one buys a best in breed for, let's say, leasing CRM, or whether it's construction management and development, or whether it's work order management, or any of the other point solution silos that surround our organization, when one decides to buy the point solution as opposed to using the inbred version inside of an ERP, what they're really saying is that the person who does this and only this for a living might be better at this than the company that has a full suite of products. The trade-off is always the full suite of products gives you an easier job with integration, but maybe you don't get the full rich feature set. And the analogy we talked about the other day was, a decathlete is going to do really well in all 10 events. Won't win any of them, but will do very well in all 10. And so I think for each application in the wheel that we all use, one has to decide, are the features and benefits important enough, critical enough that I want a best of breed player, or do I use what's subsumed into the stack of an ERP? And that's really individual. Every company and every application is different. So for us on the construction side, that made a lot of sense. Having said that, one of the questions then becomes, if you're going to use a best of breed product, whether it's Northspyre, Genius, Procore, whatever they are, how does that integrate with your current accounting system? Is the one thing that I think probably is the case for almost all users is that they don't want your general ledger is still going to be in your general ledger. Your payment systems are probably not going to be in your development management system. So now the question is, how do you neatly integrate some development management system that's running much of the development, and many of the costs are flowing through that, such that you can integrate with your existing in-house systems for bill approval, bill payment, requisition payment, et cetera, that you can still do that and have reliable information in the portal. Because remember, there are going to be journal entries and such in your books that probably don't end up in your development portal. And so those are some of the issues that we had to kind of weigh out to figure out, how we're going to address those issues. And, it wasn't too hard, but it has to be fairly well thought out. With respect to you mentioned something about, we have the in-house capability to kind of do that here. We're probably a little bit unusual, but whether what a company does or they don't, if the company that's got almost no IT in-house, software development expertise, there's so many industry consultants out there at this point that provide services for, as you know, integrations between various point solutions and the ERP players and or the workflow players. That whether you do it on your own in-house or you have a consultant do it, it is important to have some subject matter expert kind of figure out what the workflow is and how it's going to operate. Now, one final comment. In our case, with respect to this kind of tricky question, we have all of our internal workflows are automated. So all of our payment systems are automated. But the requisition approval, the notion is you really want the requisition approval to occur in the development platform. That's where the development group is really spending their time. So it wasn't terribly tricky, but in our case, we bifurcated the payment process to the requisition approval takes place inside of the development platform. Once that's done, all of the information is electronically fed to our in-house approval and payment systems, where then development accounting and chief financial officers and others, in turn, the final payment approvals are done by other people. But so our payment approval process actually transforms or traverses across the two platforms.
No, that's interesting, Robert. And maybe I can back up there, because I thought that was something interesting you touched on, which is, Vornado and your team, you guys are, maybe unique is not the word, 'cause I'm sure there are other firms like this, but probably 99% of real estate companies don't have as robust of a IT software engineering programming team. You have a whole team under you. And I guess as you think about like, how, one is how advantageous is it to have that in-house? I know there's, you mentioned the ability to bring in third-party consultants as needed. One is like how advantageous do you think it is to have this in-house? And then I guess, do you think this is the future in some way of where development teams are headed, where maybe like, if you look at developers 5, 10 years from now, they always have a little bit more robust tech talent in-house?
Well, look, that's a little bit of an unfair question anyway, because I'm a hammer and everything looks like a nail to me, right? So, as a software engineer, the answer is I love the notion that when we get a need, that we have the tools in house that we can respond quickly, right? And so I think we can be more agile because of that, and have more control of our destiny, which is good. But like I said earlier, having said that, there are plenty of really high quality and skilled consultants out there who both know the business process and have software development capabilities. So, I think a lot of that is maybe driven by the culture of the company, right? Some companies really want to outsource that function more than have direct control. And perhaps it's, we don't want to manage software in house, or we want to have, and this is almost like the best of breed argument, because an absolute neither direction is probably not the right answer. Even in our case, while we do a lot in house, we still outsource a fair amount of development, right? So I think, the pure outsource methodology where you have almost no skill in house really leaves one a little hamstrung, and you can't build everything on your own. And in fact, ultimately, many of the things you shouldn't build, you should buy, right? You should only build the things that you really have to build for various reasons. And meaning that they don't exist in the marketplace, you have a special need, and they're normally not going to be really big systems, right? Really big systems will take too much to maintain. You really need to be buying.
Yeah, yes, I mean, that's a good point, right? It's one thing to build a system, it's another thing to maintain it, improve it over time. Um, I guess more, if I pull away a little bit from like the technology, usually, I guess one is, as you guys thought about like leaning into a development management platform, how do you guys think about, aside from like some of the feature specific things, like we need to manage the draw, that type of like, can you talk a little bit more about just about things like the business rationale and case for doing something at all, right? Like, because some businesses are thinking a lot about, when they're thinking about the digital imperative, what's the ROI on that? Like, are there cost savings to be had through efficiencies? Is it that we are like better able to retain institutional knowledge, and because of that, our company gets smarter about planning future projects and executing on existing projects and managing our vendor relationships more effectively? Is it things about being able to drive like real-time insights that help, I don't know, like your team negotiate change orders more effectively, or just be more resilient on the ground, adapt to things that might cause cost overruns? Like, usually there's some like bigger business rationale that's happening at your level. You're sort of at the C-suite level, and I imagine you are sort of that bridge between the executives on your team and then the team actually executing on things. So how do you guys think about like the business rationale, or why do anything at all, and how should you think about that?
Well, the driver for us, there were a couple. I mean, and not that ROI is not important. Obviously, cost is important. I think having external partners and external reporting needs, and having accessibility to all the details surrounding large development projects was probably the bigger driver for us. That, and of course, the development group, while they were automated, they weren't quite as automated as, let's say, our property operations group is in managing CapEx. So I think the driver for us was getting a platform that could really contain and surface all of the myriad pieces of information around a large piece of development that would make it easy for people at any of the levels to really understand, draw for draw, where are we in the project, where are we in the budget, And so, again, but one of the catalysts was, external partners and wanting to make sure that all parties had access to a, a good set of information. Now, having said that, once you develop a cadence where on large development projects, you're using a platform like this, inevitably there will be efficiencies in operations. I mean, part of it, simple efficiencies like inbound invoicing gets much easier because the inbound invoicing read by AI, it ends up in an inbox. It's assigned to a schedule of values, and the basic processing gets easier. And I don't want to say that that's not important. I mean, it's an administrative savings, but ultimately for planning and execution, having institutionalized knowledge of prior projects, will provide leverage in future projects.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Robert. So I mean, maybe like let's sort of maybe stay in this general domain a bit, and just in terms of teams evaluate like that evaluation process and driving alignment through an organization. Different development teams I noticed there are probably a couple archetypes of how teams are structured, right? Sometimes you have the development team, and then you have development accounting sitting in separate departments. Sometimes they're unified. We see a couple different archetypes depending on the size and sophistication of the organization. That said, I guess when you're trying to digitize a lot of these processes and these groups that are working together, that can often make it more complicated. I mean, when you're trying to make a decision, I've seen firms that may put a committee together, this sort of cross-functional committee. Sometimes it's one of these teams is leading the charge and then trying to bring the other teams into the fold once they've sort of like made a decision on what they want to do, and they're trying to persuade the broader company. Sometimes some teams have someone like you that can really orchestrate this process, but most teams don't, right? Some teams have a IT department that's running RFPs, right? And I guess really my thought is like really no matter like how teams are structured, I've seen a lot of variation in how teams go about that and the challenges that end up happening. So I'm just curious from your view and just like procurement and evaluation of, to go through this process, whether it's for a development management platform or another type of digital platform that your team is bringing on, like how have you like driven alignment across, and how do you recommend teams drive alignment where maybe the accounting team has a strong view versus the development team has another view versus maybe the executive leadership has a view on what they want and need, and how are you trying to triangulate between these different parties and making sure the organization's getting the best outcome?
Well, first, always listen to executive leadership. Always listen to executive leadership. There's a potpourri of methods to do this, and so some of it's based on the culture of the company, and then I can discuss a little bit how we operate. But first, 15 years ago, IT brought solutions to the organization. Any digital transformation was driven by IT. And the advent of this device here and apps and people getting so much more comfortable with understanding what software can do and what an app can do changed the world. And for the CIO, it changed the paradigm completely, because we're no longer driving the digital transportation. We're facilitating, we're collaborating, but the reality is we won't be successful if we drive it. The business has to drive it. So we have a little bit of a combination of all of the above here. We do have some committees, and the committees have a lot of people on it where we look at ideas and we decide what things we want to do. And that's good and bad. The bad is it sometimes takes longer. The good is you get a good cross-section of opinions. This specific development project to select this piece of software was driven strictly by the development business. So wasn't it the committee was the person who runs the development group. He was the number one stakeholder. And then development accounting, who obviously supports that team and person. So we again, were present at the table. We're there for all the demos. We're there for, all of the comparisons. But in the end, and I think our counsel is important because we know what we're looking at in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of the packages. But in the end, the package that is selected has to be the one that the business wants.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense.
And in our case here on the development side, it was and I think that it made it, those are the ones that are probably most effective when there's a very specific need, like a development accounting. We had a treasury management search a little while ago, and that's such a specific silo to buy that, you don't have a large committee. You've got the business unit that uses it. You've got some accountants involved. So I think where those are probably the most successful, because the stakeholders who will be most directly impacted, they're the ones that are, really making the decision.
Okay. Okay. And I know Cordelia has mentioned that I get to ask you questions for 5 more minutes before she wants us to do some Q&A with the audience. So maybe I can do a couple rapid questions a little bit, Robert. Culture is so important. You've mentioned the word a few times throughout this conversation. I guess you've done it successfully, right? But I know, and what's relatively an old school industry in a lot of ways, real estate development, building a culture that supports innovation and digital change is really challenging. And then that's part of the transformation journey. So I guess how have you approach digital transformation from a cultural point of view?
Well, look, we're cheerleaders, obviously, for automation. I don't know that we can impact it as much as that starts at the top. That sort of culture is transmitted from the top down. It has to be supported from executive leadership for starters. And then the question becomes, I guess, what does the staff look like? Some individuals are more ready for change than others. And, I don't know that there's any silver bullet or general answer. I think a lot of it probably is you could figure out by understanding the culture of the company, which has been there for a long time. And then, all cultures move, and particularly now they're all moving more and more towards understanding automation is important, but it's probably something that was more endemic to an organization.
Yeah, and I think that's really great that you touched on, the executive leadership is really setting the tone in a lot of ways. Because I think when we talk about digital transformation, people are thinking about what technology can I use, and they're not often thinking about sometimes the motivation and the culture, the tone for adapting sort of starts there in their messaging to their team on what they want to see, where they want to see the team be in 12, 24 months, 5 years as well. So I think that's something really important that you brought up. And in terms of just the human element, right? You bring a technology, it's changing productivity levels, teams can accomplish different things, it's unlocking new areas of value. That's sometimes rejiggering roles, responsibilities. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes people are like, great, I don't have that on my plate anymore. This tool is doing this for me. And then sometimes you have resistance to change in organizations. And I guess, how do you think about integrating technology while managing that human element of role changes that might need to correspond with digitizing processes?
Again, I think that's really more up to the managers of the various departments. So with the advent of more automation, you really are supposed to unlock the worker's ability to do more value-based work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one would think that if you're going to help people's jobs produce more value-based work, that they would be a good thing. And I think generally it is. I think that's the good news, is when people see something they used to do, a menial task that they spend a lot of time doing, and all of a sudden it's cut in half or it's eliminated, certainly that's helpful. But again, doing things very differently, also, like you said, there's resistance. I think in the end, it's a case-by-case basis with the manager of the department. This is where the culture gets transmitted downhill, and ultimately the manager of the department who provides the morale and culture, the subculture within a department, that's where the responsibility probably lies.
Mm-hmm. Great. And my last one, I know Cordelia wants, and then I'll open it up. Because I'd love for you to just frame a lot of what we talked about, Robert. There's so much happening in prop tech technology, the ups and downs of the market, and in general maturation of many of the digital platforms in our space. And so I'm curious, what advice do you have for other real estate firms, for your peers in the industry who are really maybe earlier in this process of starting their digital transformation journey, where they're starting to explore what that looks like for their firm, whether they're a mid-sized developer, a small developer, or a large large publicly traded developer like Vornado, like what should they be thinking about? How can they set themselves up for success in this upcoming market cycle?
That's another loaded. Well, I guess the first thing is you can't boil the ocean quickly. So just thinking out loud, you first will probably want to rationalize what are the areas of the business that need the most. What are the because at first, like kids in the candy store, you look at all the potential things you could do, and you can't do them all at once, and they all take a lot of time, and nothing happens in the time frame that you ever projected. So probably first and foremost is to really prioritize those areas of the business and the operation that will be impacted the most by improved efficiencies and automation. I guess the second part then becomes, do you, that sort, whatever that function or silo of software is that something that you should be looking for a third party solution, or you should be looking at your ERP system? Does it exist? Does it exist in a strong enough fashion inside your ERP system? And if it's a third party solution, then of course you have the shopping to do. And the shopping would really, I think that's another area where I think sometimes people don't spend enough time. They want to, they look at a bunch of products, they look okay. All right, let's pick the one that looks okay. The problem is once you say go, you're married, and you're married typically for a really long time. So one piece of advice I would give to people are spend more time than you think you need selecting the product. Kick the tires. Don't just kick the tires a little bit, kick the tires a lot. Make sure it really does exactly what you think it's going to do. Because the more time you spend up front, the less surprises you're going to have once you implement. The one thing no one wants is, and during every implementation, no matter how much you've searched, you're going to find out things that you didn't know. And sometimes they're good things, sometimes they're not so good things, but you really want to minimize that. The only way to do that is to do more due diligence than you wanted. Most people don't really want, when they buy software, like we do POCs on almost everything that we buy. We want to see the thing, and we don't want to just see vendor scripted demos. Vendor scripted demos are good, but ultimately we want to play with the software, and we want to really put data in that we can see how it works. It's tedious. It's very time consuming. And when you have a thought that I like that one, I want to buy that one, you really don't want to spend that extra time to do it. It's totally worth spending the extra time to do.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good point, Robert, and thanks for sharing that with the audience. Cordelia, sorry, I know you said 5 minutes, but do we have questions from the broader audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And Robert, William, thank you so much. That was a great, lively discussion. A lot of good insights there. First question here is for Robert here. So it's hard to make vendors and design partners adopt new platforms. So how does Vornado get these critical team members to commit to using new software and train them to use it properly?
Our employees or vendors and design partners? Vendors and design partners. Not an easy question. I mean, not easily. I think because of our size and weight, we can demand it more than others, but I think being firm with the vendor is key. And I guess being able to demonstrate why it's good for both parties, that there's an alignment between the vendor or partner using it and us using it. If you can't convince somebody that there's a good alignment there and there's good rationale, but I hear the question, and over time there have been various circumstances where we've run into that, and the vendors are using A, B, and C. They don't want to use what we want to use. And, I don't think there's an easy answer, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Rationalizing and convincing, cajoling, selling, are the best tools.
Yeah, that was something when I was on the development side of things I ran into pretty frequently. I remember there was a platform I was using where we had to get the vendors engaged. And I say, like, my view was about a third of the vendors, no problem. Another third, like, willing to play ball, but like maybe not the greatest back of house. And so you're having to give them some amount of support to help them with that transition, which sort of wait on your team a bit. And then the other third, I found just like either did not do things by the timeline, so you have to do it for them, right? And so, a lot of that thinking when I co-founded Northspyre, and a lot of like some of what we do is like we sort of created like two paths. One is one path where vendors can be very engaged in the platform. That's usually what we recommend, but also one thing on Northspyre is we can sort of sync into the email-based workflow. So vendors today might be emailing invoices, change orders, contract, lien waivers. We're capturing that out of that workflow, extracting the data with AI. And so like Robert described earlier, like even categorizing it into budgets on your projects automatically. So you have the ones that's pretty light vendor touch, or the vendor just needs to know how to keep using email. And over time, you might integrate them equally into like getting into what we call like the vendor hub or whatever equivalent might be in another platform. So
That's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's not always an all or none proposition. Sometimes, you don't need everybody to adopt what you have, and you could do workarounds. Sometimes the answer is there's a critical path and a specific vendor has to, and then you're faced with, an issue, but it doesn't always have to be an all or none proposition.
All right, another question here. Other than accounting, what are other software areas that developers might look at that you think would provide a lot of benefit to them?
That's a good question. And I'm not an expert in this space for sure, but what I do see is more and more there are platforms that deal with the actual construction of the building, whether it's checking BIM diagrams versus as built, or whether it's tracking labor on premises. There's a whole silo. Again, given the development of apps being so easy, there's a lot of software that really doesn't have to do with the accounting or the tracking or what Northspyre does, but it's more for the on-site management of whether it's maybe security and badging into construction sites, or it's tracking employees, or it's again, I saw one cameras all over the construction site for audit purposes, insurance and audit purposes. I've seen one where, workers had wearable vests that had gyroscopic controls. So things like slip and falls could be detected. The workers moving through the sites can be detected and tracked and things like that. So I think there's a lot of automation around building the building that's still in the nascent stage that provides some really interesting, future possibilities. I think that probably the biggest is really when you BIM diagram of a building and you're building the building, I saw one where you can walk around with a camera, your phone, and you could look at the as-built conditions and it could spot violations or not, deficiencies immediately, and then create work orders for correcting those deficiencies and that sort of thing.
Are there any solutions like that, like an on-site IQ, for example, or similar technologies that Vornado is using outside of like Northspyre on the development side?
That really wouldn't apply to us as much as it would for the construction manager. Those pieces of technology probably are targeted at the CM, not really the R&D. So no, most of the building operations technology, and we do have a tech group in New York that does all the research and selection of the sorts of things we're going to put in the buildings, but those are more of operational, not development.
We've talked about like accounting at different stages in this conversation. Talked about the MRI, ERD, these kind of modules, and so forth. What do you have any best practices or perspective on navigating digital transformation when the accounting team maybe has more clout than the development team over operating systems and processes?
That's a tough one, because the reality is they're both important stakeholders at the table. But I always think that I don't want to say accountants are the second-class citizens, because really the IT folks are the second-class citizens. We shovel the coal in the basement and hope to keep the trains running on time. That's our job. But I do think that the primary stakeholder, for particularly an application like this, are the developers. Not, it has to satisfy the needs of the accountants and the accounting department, but it does depend on the application. Again, this one really needs to resonate with the developers. It shouldn't be driven by accounting. It should be supported by accounting.
Yeah. All right. I think maybe one or two more questions, if that's good. I know we're coming up on time here. This one's a little bit broader, but what are some of the lessons you learned or mistakes from your own experience that you could help others avoid who are starting out on their journey here?
I'm a software developer, and like I said, in the early years, we brought most of the solutions to the business. And over the years, that's changed for the better, because when they bring it to you, probably way more likely to get adoption. So I think for me, some of the lessons are, sometimes we'll see something that the business doesn't see. And we say, it would be a really good idea if we do X and Y and we automate that. And then we kind of soft sell it to them and they say, yeah. And then we go and we build it and maybe we don't get the adoption we want. And the answer, I guess, is not that they have to drive everything, but if it's an idea that we come up with because we see an inefficiency, you have to really make sure that they buy in before you do anything. Because without the business buying in, adoption basically will fail.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right. I'm sorry, William, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's a great point. At the end of the day, it's it's not just about having the technology, but it's about adoption across the team, which is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have technology if it's not adopted. So.
Yeah, and by the way, the one thing that we all face is that none of us put out solutions that gain 100% adoption, and all of us have some projects that got no adoption, and we look at it and say, "What the heck happened there?" Others get moderate adoption, and then some we hit you really hit the home run with, and everybody loves it. So, what you really need to do is to try and figure out which ones, what were the characteristics of the ones that really were very, very successful, and try and steer in that direction. And I think it's getting the business has to really be enthusiastic and buy in. You can try and soft sell them on a feature and they'll say, yeah, I guess that would be good, but I guess that would be good isn't enough. It's you got to make that for me now. That's what you have to hear.
You have to buy in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, I think I have one final question. And I think, earlier in the conversation, Robert, you had talked a little bit about the accounting integrations at a high level. Curious kind of when you're evaluating different technology, what are some of the key considerations around integrations, whether it, in thinking about building that whole tech stack beyond just the accounting side?
Well, integrations aren't easy, right? Some are easier than others, but sometimes they're difficult. So the first is the third-party solution that you're buying outside of your ERP that much more robust that you really want it? And again, there's a very strong argument for lots. That's why this whole ecosystem of these point solutions and companies like Northspyre in your space and others as well are doing well. I guess the next question would be, once I've decided to do this, how complicated is the integration? Is it one way? Is it two way? Is it real time? How open is the vendor? Some vendors are just not as open as others, unfortunately. And the reality is, I've always said over the years as an evangelist, everybody has to commit to complete openness. No one's holding anyone hostage. Everybody should have APIs to everything so that all products can interoperate smoothly. So one of the barriers sometimes is that the product may not have the appropriate APIs or interface standards to allow for a good integration. That I'd say to everybody, pound on the vendor's door and tell them that's not the ethical way to do business. But if you don't have those barriers, if the answer are there are ways to get data in and out, then it becomes a matter of how complicated and who does it. Do you do it in-house? Do you outsource it? But all of that is the value is weighed against how rich the features are that you're trying to obtain. You're back to what are the projects I should tackle first? Where's the low-hanging fruit? What are the things that will really make a difference? Those are the ones that you want to go after and prioritize.
If you're open to one last kind of fun question off the cuff here, I have one just kind of thinking ahead here, but I was curious of what you think about, how do you kind of see advancements in technology shaping industry kind of in the next 5 years, and if you have any sort of bold prediction for CRE development in 2030?
Well, you would have been on another planet if you don't mention AI, right? So the world is crazy for AI right now. There's a FOMO in the industry about somehow not having it. I think the best and worst thing that ever happened to us was in November 2022, ChatGPT was unveiled, right? And so people got to see how powerful a large language model is over a completely vectorized database of this small thing called the internet, right? So yeah, when somebody spends like $25 billion to index the internet, and with a large language model, you get incredible results, right? And so, and again, that's the best thing that happened because it's really great technology. But I think it put the expectation in all of our labs that somehow all of the things we use tomorrow are going to be automated with AI. And what we found so far in the probably year and a half that we've been experimenting is that none of these things, the hard things don't come easily. And well, I think AI as a technology will bring about profound change. Everyone would agree will bring about profound changes in the next 5 years. It won't happen as quickly as people want. And I guess it'll be in a couple of swim lanes. One swim lane will be, we want our the vendors that we use, it's got to be embedded in their products. So, it's how much is embedded in their products, and then how much individual real estate firms will have AI sectors inside their business. There are very few who can scale up to have the correct amount of data scientists, prompt engineers, and technologists to develop something in-house. But I say that today, given the state of tools. The tools will get better and better every year, which will, of course, make things better. In 2000, with the internet bubble, the dot-com bubble, everyone said that the internet's going to change the world and it's going to happen in like 12 to 18 months. I remember talking to investors many, many years ago and having a lunch with somebody. They said, well, if you can't rewrite the entire product on the internet in 6 months, then you're going to be history anyway. And I'm sitting at that lunch looking and saying, does this person not understand how long it takes to develop software? Clearly not, right? And, as it turns out, really the internet, I would say, took a solid 15 years to develop the kind of functionality that we come to expect every day, whether it's ordering a car on your phone or something to eat or checking on a condition on a job site on your phone. So that was I look at it as like a 15-year transformation. I think AI is going to be considerably shorter, but I do think it's certainly a 5-year period. We'll see tons happening. And the question, and it's unknown right now. You can only imagine the ways it's going to automate more of the things we do, but it will be a fun ride.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Robert, and thanks, William, for hosting this. And we appreciate everyone joining.
Well, thank you guys. It was fun. William, it's fun to spend time with you.
Likewise, Robert, I really appreciate it. Always engaging conversation with you, and you always have me thinking. Everything you just said about AI and this whole conversation is something that I'll be thinking a lot about. So thank you for taking the time. I appreciate you being on the panel. Thank you for working with us.
No problem.
Your team.
Have a great day, guys.
Right. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.